We're here today interviewing Mr. Shedlock, who's a special ed Signum Fide teacher here at LaSalle. All right, so our first question is, why do parents feel the need to pay a significant amount of money for Signum Fide when there's other special education programs in public schools?
Okay, that's a good question. I'd say we see sort of three trends related to answering that. So a lot of families want a Catholic option for their kids, and that's a big motivating factor for them.
Okay.
So as it relates to attending LaSalle, we provide a program that would be appropriate for their needs. And so parents are thinking, hey, we want Catholic education, LaSalle offers a Signum Fide program, it's a good fit, and that's one motivating factor.
Okay.
Sort of that faith-based educational opportunity drives a lot of families towards what we're doing here at LaSalle, or any Catholic school, I guess, that would be doing this sort of work. So that's one. Another explanation or a trend that we see are families who are seeking out a program that is providing an opportunity for small class sizes and at the same time allowing for the kids to be part of a larger community. So there's a balance between taking classes that are about 10 to 11 students at a time, so those kids can receive instruction that's at their level, while at the same time being part of a school community where they're included and they feel welcomed and are participating in a variety of activities. And then I'd say the third trend around why families with kids with special needs are looking to private school versus public school has a little bit to do with their histories in public education often. So it's we've had a group of families that have looked at us as, hey, this is an appropriate education for our kids. It's an alternative to what we've experienced in the public schools, and we want to try something new.
Okay. Does the Signum Fide program use the EPI, the Individual Education Plan? And if not, how do public schools use the EPI?
Okay, so those are called IEPs, and they're individual education plans. And so one difference you're going to want to distinguish here is the public education model provides special education, because special education is a legally defined entity.
Okay.
When private schools like LaSalle provide education opportunities for kids with special needs or with disabilities, we're not meeting the legal definition of special education the way a public school would look at it.
Okay.
So a lot of times what happens is we'll have a conversation and a public school special ed director will say, well, are you guys doing special ed? And then we'll say back, well, this is the different things we're doing. And then they'll say, well, special education is defined in the law as needing to be provided by a certificated special ed instructor who's providing individualized instruction that's meeting specified goals and objectives, which is a long way of saying that what happens with an IEP is protected by the law. And when you access a private education, we are not bound by the same laws and regulations that the public schools are bound by. So to bring it back to your question, the kids that are attending LaSalle that qualify for an IEP are often served under what's called an ISP. It's an individual service plan. And what that plan guarantees is that families can access a set of services that are provided by the local school district in which LaSalle is located in. What we do here as the Signum Fide program is we create individual goals and objectives for all of our students in reading and in writing and in math, but they're not following the same format or protocol as an IEP would require.
Okay. And I know you said that Signum Fide, what the parents are looking for are, Catholic education, smaller class sizes. But what would you say, do you think, I mean, obviously every kid's different, but do you think coming out of a Catholic or private special ed program is maybe more meaningful, or do they get more out of that than a public school? Because I know public schools you can get, distracted, whether or not you have a disability or not.
Okay. Well, so some of the benefits to special education in public school, particularly as I've experienced it, is when you're in need of an educational opportunity until the age of 21.
Okay.
Your public education, the local public education provider needs to make that available.
Okay.
So for a lot of kids, when they turn 18, they're not necessarily ready to
Go out in the
be
real
independent in the world.
Right.
And so for students that are similar to that, and those are their kinds of needs, the public education model is a great opportunity for them, because it guarantees that they're going to be in educational programming till they're 21. And that programming is often like independent living skills or job coaching, or often it can be providing kids an opportunity to finish their degree with one more year, and maybe they'll connect with the local vocational center
Right.
as part of their education. So there's a lot of benefits to that.
Okay.
To your question, for people that are looking at what we're doing here at LaSalle, or like a Catholic school that's doing this kind of work, one of the things that we're able to provide are classes that are providing instruction that are at the level that the students walk through the door at.
Okay.
And that's a challenge in the public schools. The way the public schools are organized, many of them, is that to differentiate the instruction to reach the lowest kids in the room and the highest achievers in the room is a real challenge.
So basically, you're saying that every kid that steps into this, even to LaSalle, but the Signum Fide program, they're taught the way they need to be taught due to their needs.
Yeah, what we're able to do is create instructional design that's responsive to their needs,
Okay.
so that they don't fall behind the other kids.
Right. Okay.
Where that's a big challenge that
The public
a lot of the families experience. Their kids have fell behind grade level,
Right.
or they fell behind the other kids, and it's a way of saying that the groupings they've been part of have not delivered differentiation or instruction at their level consistent enough. Whereas the kids that are in the Signum Fide program, for the 4 years they're here, we're consistently delivering instruction that's informed by where they're at. So we're not pushing ahead because we have to.
Mm-hmm.
We're moving ahead as they're learning and as they're growing.
Okay.
Why did you choose to teach in the Signum Fide program instead of at public school?
Okay, that's a good question. I started out teaching general education in Phoenix in 2001, and I taught 7th and 8th grade. And so I started my career in education as a teacher, and it was a good fit for me in many ways. At the time, I was like 23 years old, so I wanted to learn more about the world and psychology in particular. So I studied psychology at a graduate level, and when I finished my master's degree, I was able to be a certificated psychologist in the schools. So I worked in the public schools for quite some time, working with kids with IEPs and kids with other learning needs or learning disabilities. And after a period of time doing that, I started looking for ways to get back into the classroom, because I started out as a teacher and I really liked being a teacher. And through that process and looking for opportunities to get back into the classroom, I learned about LaSalle and what they were doing with the Signum Fide program. And it was a good fit for my background and my skill sets, and because it was a new program, it was a really exciting opportunity to be part of. So that's how I ended up here.
Okay. What do you think about government funding? Do you think more should be going towards private institutions, or do you think more should be going to, I mean, obviously they go towards public institutions, and sometimes they don't necessarily meet the needs, but do you think private institutions should get the same amount of benefits, or do you think private institutions should be paid by, the parents who are sending their kids?
Well, it's a complicated question because of how funding works for education. And I haven't lived in Oregon long enough to know exactly how that works in Oregon, but having worked in Washington and lived there for a long time, part of the answer to that question is looking at how education's funded. So in Washington, which I'm sure is similar to Oregon, the tax base comes from the local community first. So you look at where you're living and you generate a tax base that goes into the public education model first. Mm-hmm. Then the state levies taxes and they allocate funds to their public school districts throughout the state.
Right.
So if you happen to live in a place where you have a lower tax base and in a state that's not collecting a significant amount of taxes that are earmarked for education, then you're in a circumstance where there's a less amount of money for you to access for public school. Mm-hmm. So that's a complicated variable, especially when I think about funding for private school, because there are a lot of communities that are lacking funding for public school. Mm-hmm. So as you think about trying to fund or generate funds for private school, especially if they come from the public or public taxes, it's complicated because oftentimes you're looking at taking money perhaps away from their local public school
Right.
district, and that's not something I'm totally on board with.
Mhm.
Another complicated variable is that there are federal funds generated for the education of kids with disabilities. So there's a percentage of funding that comes from the federal government to any state or any community for students with disabilities. And so because of the way the funding structure works, it makes it difficult to take a position that doesn't raise questions about, okay, let's generate some money for private institutions, let's create vouchers, for example. Well, in doing so, how are you going to ensure that the local communities don't lose out on a tax base that they're already perhaps not as well funded as they need to be? So it becomes complicated from that perspective. In like a perfect world, it would be great if we had enough of a revenue source for local communities to ensure a quality public education while making it available for private educational institutions to be also tapping into that funding. So a voucher model could make sense.
Right.
But as it's been proposed so far, it seems like it will likely take money away from people that really need it. And then you start debating, well, what should somebody be able to do for their kid? If they want to pay for a private education for their kid, that's great. Should we set up a system where there's no way to help them? I'm not
Right.
sure I'm on board with that either.
Okay.
How does your program determine like who's eligible for assisted learning?
Okay, so we have an admissions process for kids who are looking to come to LaSalle. And for kids who are perhaps a candidate for Signum Fidei, they're often identified through the general admissions process. So there'll be kids who will apply to LaSalle, and the admissions team will see that perhaps they'd be really well suited to be enrolled in Signum Fidei. So that's one piece. Mrs. Moore, part of her job is to market our program and to recruit and generate applicants for what we're doing with Signum Fidei. So
you're saying that people are now applying for Signum Fidei by itself instead of the general pool?
Yeah, so we've always had this coupling of people that learned about what we're doing with Signum Fidei and they want to apply directly to that, and that's what they're really looking for. And then there have been groups of kids who applied to LaSalle, and the admissions team thought it would be a really good fit for them to be part of the Signum Fidei program. And what we're doing now is Mrs. Moore, part of her, what she does at school is help create partnerships with the local Catholic schools in the area so that they're aware that we are an opportunity for kids that attend their schools.
Okay.
And then when somebody applies, we take into account their educational needs. So we'll look at things like an IEP or a psychological evaluation or a medical diagnosis. And we'll take that and also look at their educational performance or their present levels of performance. And then what always happens is kids will come to school and they'll visit for the day, and then they'll meet with somebody like Miss Eastman and they'll have an interview about their experience, and we'll start to see if a fit is emerging. We'll meet with their parents and we'll have a long conversation about what we do and what they're looking for and that kind of thing. Mrs. Moore will go to the school that the students enrolled at and observe the student in their environment and speak with their teachers and try to learn more what they might need in school. And we put that all together to make a decision about fit and if we can meet their needs, and that's how we go about doing that.
And then the last two questions. The first one is, obviously here at LaSalle we don't have anybody with Down syndrome or in a wheelchair or like a severe physical disability. At public schools, how come they get more of those type of kids? Is that just due to the number of either the school, or is it due to it's harder to educate those type of disabilities?
Okay, so there's a couple of pieces to consider in the answer to that. Public schools have a responsibility to find individuals with disabilities.
Okay.
So it's known as child find. So anywhere you live in the United States, your local public school district needs to find your son or daughter if they present a disability or are suspected of having one. So with that being the case, there are programs that have been established since the mid-70s to be responsive to that kind of need.
Okay.
Therefore, there's a history and there's a certain level of expertise that's been developed that's existed in the public schools for a long time to meet the needs of kids who are multiple disability or have a significant physical disability.
Okay.
So that's part of the